let's go back to simplifying. Let's simplify sine of x plus cosine of x, cotangent of x. Now we may want to look at this and say, well, there's two terms, let's try and factor something out of each term that they share, but you can see that there's three different trig functions. They don't share any trig functions. So what I'm going to have to do is dig deeper into that toolkit. I'm going to have to rely on seeing some things that maybe I've seen in those identities by using my flashcards. And I promise you that if you do use flashcards, you will start to see things. You will definitely start to see where to go. For instance, the cotangent of x is a reciprocal function in which we have cosine of x, let me do this in red, cosine of x over sine of x. That might appear to make it a little bit more complicated, this expression. However, now I can see that the right-hand side is a fraction. So my first step, I've got this sine of x plus cosine of x times cosine of x over sine of x. So I'm going to number out my steps. Sine of x equals cosine squared of x over sine of x. Now I have to go back to arithmetic. How do I add two fractions? Well, I need to get a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply by sine of x over sine of x to the first fraction, and that's going to give us sine squared of x over sine of x plus cosine squared of x over sine of x. And again, I'm numbering every step because in order to simplify, I need to show all of my work, because your work really has to justify how you're getting that final answer. So sine squared of x over sine of x plus cosine squared over sine of x. Well, I can rewrite that all over sine of x. So you add the numerators and you retain the denominator. And then as I'm writing that down, sine squared of x plus cosine squared of x, hey, I know that sine squared plus cosine squared is 1. So I have 1 over the sine of x. And 1 over the sine of x, I've seen that in a flashcard, that's cosecant of x. And that's as simple as it gets, folks. As simple as it gets. Cosecant of x. Can't do anything more with that to make it any more simple than it already is. So now we need to kind of step up our game and show all of our work, numbering all of our steps when we're simplifying. Okay, let's try another one. Let's rewrite. So now we're going to be given a direction here. Rewrite 1 over 1 plus the sine of x. So it is not a fraction. So we don't want it to be a fraction anymore. When you want to get rid of that binomial in the fraction, so we want to make this a monomial. So when we want to get rid of that binomial in the fraction, we end up doing that by making it a monomial. And you can make it a monomial by multiplying by the conjugate. So multiply by its conjugate. Its conjugate. So my first step, I've got 1 over 1 plus the sine of x. I'm going to multiply the denominator by its conjugate, which means I have to multiply the numerator by its conjugate, by that same conjugate, not the numerator's conjugate, so that I'm multiplying by a factor of 1. Anything over itself is 1. So we're really taking 1 over 1 plus the sine of x, and we're multiplying it by 1. Let me show you this right here. Anything over itself is 1. So we're really just multiplying by 1. But what that gives us is 1 minus the sine of x in the numerator, and we've got 1 minus sine squared of x in the denominator. Now, don't think that you can cancel out the ones and the signs because those are add-ins. You can only cancel out common factors. So 1 minus sine of x is still essentially in parentheses. 1 minus sine squared, however, we can substitute something in for that. Hopefully you know this by now. So you know that 1 minus sine of x over cosine squared of x. 1 minus sine squared is cosine squared. So we have sine squared of x plus cosine squared of x equals 1. If I subtract sine squared from both sides, I get cosine squared equals 1 minus sine squared of x. And that's exactly what we substituted in for 1 minus sine squared. We substituted in cosine squared. Now that I have a monomial denominator, I can rewrite this as the two fractions that it is. 1 over cosine squared of x minus sine of x over cosine squared of x. So I can separate it out into two fractions. And then 1 over cosine squared. Remember, our whole idea is no fractions. We don't want to have any fractions. So we've got 1 over cosine squared. Well, 1 over cosine is the same as the secant. So if I have 1 over cosine times 1 over cosine, I have secant times secant. And secant times secant is secant squared. And then here we have sine of x over cosine of x times 1 over cosine of x. If this seems difficult, try to take a deep breath. It's just arithmetic and working with fractions. So it's just working with fractions, and the more practice you get, the better you'll know which route to take. So I would try and get as much practice as possible. Remember, I want to try and get rid of all fractions. So sine of x over cosine of x is tangent of x, and 1 over cosine is secant of x. And if I wanted to, I could even take this one more step further, and I could factor out the secant, but not going to. Not going to do that. We're just going to leave it right like that because we reached our goal. No fractions, and we've achieved secant squared of x minus tangent of x times secant of x. Like I said, the best thing that you can do would be to get some practice with these simplifying expressions.